There is one figure in biblical prophecy more feared, debated, and misunderstood than almost any other, not because of how he begins, but because of how he ends. The Bible describes a future leader so persuasive, so intelligent, and so convincing that much of the world will not initially see him as evil at all. In fact, many will likely see him as the answer humanity has been waiting for. A solution to chaos, a symbol of peace, a master negotiator capable of bringing stability to a fractured world. But behind the image of hope lies one of the most dangerous deceptions described in Scripture. What if the world is not simply descending into disorder by accident? What if global instability is quietly creating the perfect conditions for a leader the Bible warned about thousands of years ago? And what if the systems such a figure would need are already beginning to emerge? Stay until the end, because the final connection we will explore may completely change how you look at current events, technology, leadership, and the future. Before we begin, if you are passionate about biblical prophecy, end times analysis, and understanding world events through Scripture, subscribe now. This channel is dedicated to uncovering prophetic patterns, spiritual realities, and biblical mysteries hidden beneath the headlines. And the upcoming videos will go even deeper into topics most people never consider until the signs become impossible to ignore. Subscribe now and become part of a growing community committed to staying spiritually awake. Now let's begin with an uncomfortable truth. Humanity has always been drawn to strong leaders during times of uncertainty. When societies feel stable, people often prefer freedom, diversity of opinion, and decentralized power. But when fear rises, economies shake, institutions weaken, and conflict intensifies, something changes. People begin craving order, clarity, security, solutions. In moments of collective anxiety, populations become far more willing to exchange freedoms for stability. History has shown this repeatedly. Crisis changes psychology, and that is what makes biblical prophecy regarding the Antichrist so fascinating. The Bible does not describe the Antichrist as an obvious villain from the beginning. He is not introduced as chaos itself. He is introduced as someone emerging in response to chaos. That distinction is critical. In Daniel 8:23-25, a ruler is described as understanding intrigue, becoming powerful, and causing astonishing devastation through deception. He is intelligent, strategic, persuasive, not merely brutal. He succeeds partly because people are deceived. Now consider Revelation 13. This chapter describes a beast figure receiving extraordinary authority, influence, and admiration. The text says, "The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast." Pause there. The whole world was not initially horrified, it was impressed. That is deeply unsettling. Why would the world admire such a figure? Perhaps because by the time he rises, the world is desperate. Think carefully about the conditions we are already seeing. Wars and rumors of wars, regional instability, growing geopolitical fragmentation, economic anxiety, institutional distrust, information warfare, technological acceleration, cultural polarization, fear as a constant background condition. What do these dynamics create? Fatigue. People become exhausted by uncertainty. And exhausted populations are uniquely vulnerable to persuasive solutions. Now imagine a future leader emerging with unusual charisma. He speaks confidently. He appears rational. He promises peace where others failed. He offers stability amid chaos. He transcends traditional political divisions. He seems uniquely capable of solving problems previous leaders could not. Would people follow him? History suggests yes. And prophecy suggests not just some people, many, possibly most. This is why the Antichrist concept is less about horror aesthetics and more about deception. The danger is not simply evil. It is evil appearing useful, attractive, necessary. That is what makes it powerful. Second Thessalonians 2 describes the man of lawlessness associated by many with the Antichrist. He is linked with deception, false signs, and self-exaltation. Again, notice the emphasis, deception. Not everyone rejects him because not everyone recognizes him. Now here is where things become even more intriguing. Could the world as currently structured even support the type of influence Scripture describes? For previous generations, some details seemed difficult to imagine. Global economic restrictions, widespread monitoring, instant communication across nations, mass psychological influence at scale. These were harder to conceptualize. Today, far less so. Technology has radically transformed what is possible. Financial systems are increasingly digital. Communication is instantaneous. Narratives can be shaped globally within hours. Public opinion can be influenced at extraordinary scale. Data collection has reached levels previous civilizations could scarcely imagine. Again, this does not prove prophecy fulfillment, but it does make certain scenarios easier to imagine. That matters. The architecture required for certain forms of centralized influence is more plausible than ever, and plausibility changes how prophecy is perceived. Now let's discuss another critical factor: peace. Daniel 9:27 is often interpreted as describing a covenant or agreement associated with a future ruler. Interpretations vary, but many prophecy students connect this with a peace framework involving Israel. Why is this significant? Because if the world grows increasingly unstable, a leader capable of facilitating major diplomatic breakthroughs, especially involving the Middle East, would gain enormous credibility. Imagine the headlines: a breakthrough no one thought possible, historic negotiations, unexpected agreements, reduced hostilities, temporary stabilization. A leader emerges as global problem solver. Would admiration follow? Almost certainly. And that is precisely why prophecy warns against superficial appearances. Not every solution is what it seems. Not every peacemaker is what he appears to be. This is a recurring biblical pattern: appearance versus reality, image versus substance. Now here is a deeper issue many overlook. The Antichrist is not merely a political phenomenon, he is also spiritual. The prefix anti can imply both opposition to Christ and substitution in place of Christ. This means the Antichrist is not merely against truth, he offers a counterfeit version, a substitute, something attractive enough to compete. That is what makes deception effective. Counterfeits only work when they resemble something real. This principle matters far beyond end-time speculation. It applies now. Truth is rarely replaced by obvious absurdity. It is more often displaced by compelling imitation. That is why discernment is essential. And Jesus warned repeatedly about deception. In Matthew 24:24, he says, "False messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs to deceive, if possible, even the elect." That is sobering. Deception in the last days is not portrayed as trivial. It is serious enough to mislead many. Now ask yourself honestly, what kind of world conditions increase vulnerability to deception? Fear, confusion, instability, fatigue, information overload, desire for rescue. Do these conditions sound familiar? That is what makes this conversation so relevant. Not because one can identify a specific individual today. Anyone claiming certainty about a current identity is speaking beyond available evidence. That is not wisdom. But recognizing preparatory conditions is different from making reckless claims. And the preparatory conditions are what many find increasingly compelling. The world is not merely chaotic, it is becoming psychologically primed for centralized solutions. This is the real issue. Not one person appearing suddenly from nowhere, but a world increasingly willing to follow someone promising rescue from disorder. That is far more realistic and far more dangerous. Now let's talk about control. Revelation 13 also describes economic restrictions associated with allegiance systems. This has generated enormous discussion for obvious reasons. Again, interpretations vary, and responsible analysis avoids forcing simplistic one-to-one identifications. But the general concept is striking: economic participation linked to compliance structures. Could such a system exist? Modern technology certainly makes increasingly sophisticated forms of economic control possible. Digital infrastructure changes the equation dramatically. Financial participation can become more traceable, conditional, and integrated than ever before. Again, possibility is not proof, but possibility matters. It removes barriers previous generations faced when trying to conceptualize prophetic scenarios. Now, why should any of this matter to someone watching this video? Because prophecy is not intended to produce paranoia. It is intended to cultivate awareness, spiritual seriousness, discernment. Jesus repeatedly told his followers to stay watchful, not because fear is the goal, but because sleepwalking through history is dangerous. Too many people assume civilization is naturally stable, that systems are self-sustaining, that institutions will reliably preserve order. History repeatedly disproves this optimism. Order is fragile, stability is conditional, and crises can accelerate transformation faster than most expect. This is why prophecy remains so relevant. It reminds people that history is not merely random. Patterns matter, human tendencies matter, spiritual realities matter, and perhaps most importantly, character matters. Because deception does not merely test knowledge, it tests allegiance. What anchors a person when narratives compete, when solutions appear attractive, when pressure intensifies? That is the deeper prophetic question. Not simply, who is the Antichrist? But how does one remain discerning in a world increasingly vulnerable to deception? That question is relevant now, not someday, now. Because the conditions Scripture warns about are not only future possibilities. Many are recurring human tendencies already visible. This is why biblical prophecy is so enduring. It illuminates both future patterns and present vulnerabilities. And here is the good news often forgotten in prophecy conversations. Scripture does not present history as spiraling uncontrollably beyond meaning. Even amid warnings, it consistently emphasizes sovereignty, perspective, endurance, hope. Psalm 46 says, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." Notice the wording, not help after trouble disappears, help in trouble. This is critical. Biblical stability is not dependent on global calm. It is rooted deeper. That is what makes prophetic awareness meaningful rather than merely frightening. Now let me ask you something. If the world is increasingly unstable, if populations are becoming more fatigued and anxious, if global systems are becoming more integrated, if Scripture repeatedly warns about deception tied to crisis, should this not at least provoke reflection, not hysteria? Reflection. Because prophecy is not about obsession with darkness, it is about clarity in confusing times. And clarity changes everything. It changes how people evaluate leadership, how they interpret events, how they prioritize truth, how they prepare spiritually. So what happens next? Will global instability continue intensifying? Will future crises increase public appetite for extraordinary leadership? Could the world become increasingly receptive to solutions Scripture warned might come with hidden dangers? These are open questions, but they are no longer abstract. That is what makes this topic so compelling. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe the world is being psychologically prepared for a leader like the Antichrist? What signs do you think are most relevant today? Comment below. I read the comments, and some of the best discussions on this channel happen there. And if this video gave you a new perspective on biblical prophecy and the future, subscribe now. Because in the next video, we will examine one of the most mysterious and debated prophetic systems in Scripture, the mark of the beast, digital control, and why many believe modern systems are making revelation easier to imagine than ever before. You do not want to miss that. Subscribe now, stay watchful, and remember,